Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode we'll be sailing out in the Tier 4 Japanese premium cruiser, known as the Yubari, in a Tier 4 standard battle on the map Big Race. We are joined today by our good friend Nick and his Kuma, and the focus of this video is going to be the concept of kiting in a cruiser. The general application of this concept enabling you to become a more successful cruiser player in my experience. This is quite the opposite, but a continuation in a way of last week's episode where we talked about the concept of tanking in a battleship, featuring the Quachi, link available in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now for those who are interested in it and have not yet seen it. But focusing on the here and now, what is kiting? Well, my personal definition for World of Warships would be as follows. The idea of long-range harassment. Keeping your foes towards the maximal limit of your range, i.e. within the final 25%. So here, with our 12.8 kilometer range, we're trying to keep our foes somewhere between, let's say, 10 and 12.8 kilometers. Raining down a continuous stream of fire with our fast firing guns, or just the volume of our guns in the case of some cruisers at our tier. Being accurate with our guns, and in the meantime using the distance between us and our foes along with our maneuverability to cause our opponents to miss and become frustrated. We bleed down their health over time, they fail to bring down our health over time. And we really do need to avoid taking hits wherever possible with our maximal health pool of 18,700, and on top of that our armour being lackluster, 57mm at maximum, because in essence we are a destroyer leadership. But with that, what tools do we have here that enable us to kite effectively? Well, our guns straight away. We have two twin 140mm artillery batteries, one mounted towards the bow, one mounted towards the aft. So an AX configuration, and they have good firing arcs in general. We've already talked about our sufficient range, and our high explosive shells are very good, a typicality of Japanese cruisers, whereby we do a maximal high explosive damage of 2,400, we have a 10% fire chance, more on that later, and our armour piercing, which we will try to use briefly, isn't too bad. It does a maximal damage per citadel of 2,700, but it only really works when we get our foes to say 8 kilometers or less and they present ideal broadsides. But we don't want to get close to our foes wherever possible unless they are, say, a destroyer. We're going to go hunt them down and we'd use our high explosive anyway. And here we're already seeing, as we dodge the fire from the enemy Danai, how using our maneuverability and the distance between us is really working out. We've done a good amount of damage to them, just shy of 3,000, they've done none to us. So let's go back to the maneuverability, a top speed of 34.5 knots and a rudder shift time of 3.8 seconds, so we can see why we can easily dodge incoming fire, or at least attempt to. On top of that, we have to consider that our detectability of 9.6 kilometers by sea is ideal and very forgiving for us to be able to kite away from foes. But in general, one thing that should be considered as Nick falls to the torpedoes of an enemy Dursky is that you need to be aware of your detectability by sea, because if 5 enemy ships target you, as we're seeing here through priority target, the captain skill, and you want to be hidden, and we're not firing here for a little bit, if you can pull the distance far enough, as we have, and you're aware of your detectability radius, and then as a result, situations where you're being targeted by a lot of ships are not going to become a problem as such, because by the time everyone starts focusing you, you've disappeared off their screen. So that's something to be aware of in general, the radius between your ship and the enemy ships for detectability. Outside that, so raining down some more high explosive on the enemy St. Louis now, we also have to consider that our fire chance of 10% has a key role to play. Now, not just in terms of setting fires, but the value of those fires, as we've set one on the enemy St. Louis and they've used their fire extinguisher. What do I mean by the value of these fires? Well, not right now, you're not really going to see anything as such with the fires. You'll see some health bleed, but it's not important. It's as we go into the mid to late game and enemy ships have lost a good chunk of their health. Because World of Warships has the concept of damage saturation for those unaware. The idea, from my basic understanding, that each part of an enemy ship, such as the bow, such as the aft, will have an amount of health attributed to it out of your total health pool. So let's just say, for example, that your bow is 20% of your ship's total health pool. As a result, after you've knocked off that 20% of your health pool by constantly shooting the enemy's bow, they're not going to take any more damage in that region, or a minimal amount. Therefore, with that section blackened, that's how you can see it on screen that the damage saturation has occurred, whether it from be high explosive or armour piercing shells, you need to aim somewhere else. but sometimes you won't be able to shoot somewhere else because you're not able to provide the lead. Alternatively, you're in a position where you can't aim somewhere else because the enemy ship's too close. So instead, setting fires still remains an item, and our 10% fire chance with the regular fires it causes means that when the damage saturation is in place and our damage output on our high explosive shells has been minimalised, we can set the fires that will bleed the rest of the enemy ship's health out. And you can see here how we're doing a regular 792 damage per high explosive shell to this enemy South Carolina. Later on, when we shoot at them, that will drop off, and that's where we need the fires to make up the distance. But more on that later. In the meantime, we're also using one of our teammates here as a prime scouting vehicle, and that's in the form of our friendly Nikolai I, whereby they haven't joined this battle, whether through a disconnection or being away from keyboard, it doesn't matter. But what we're doing here is using them as a scouting tool. Because one temptation, especially when you're newer to the game, if you see someone who hasn't joined the match essentially, is to shoot at them to rack up the damage and therefore rack up your credits and experience earnings. But remember, when you shoot at someone, your detectability goes out to your maximum gun range. When you fire your main artillery pieces, I should clarify. And therefore, in doing that, that means that the likes of the Svetlana on the enemy team here have exposed themselves to my aim and therefore made themselves primary targets. Now whether they're aiming at our friendly Campbelltown who's pulling back out their smoke screen or the Nikolai, their attention's no longer on us, but we get a load of free damage. So exploiting teammates who haven't joined the game can be very useful from time to time. As the enemy Koenig Albert here notices that we start to drop some high explosive on them, they'll start turning their guns towards us. Now when we're not using our distant teammates in order to provide ourselves with vision and therefore more damage output, what else is there to consider? Well, the kiting game isn't just about holding down one side of the map, and we can see that our team collapsed down the eastern side very quickly, as the rest of our team seem to be meandering around the centre / the southwestern side of the map, as we take some high explosive damage from the enemy Koenig Albert here, and they cause us to have to repair our engine, otherwise we'd be a sitting dark as we don't have last stand, the 2-point captain skill. Well, we have to consider that we're not going to fight on one front. We always need to be looking at the minimap and ask ourselves, right, where can we be that we can be in a position to do consistent damage, but at the same time not be by ourselves continuously? Because when you're by yourself against multiple foes, no matter how good you are at dodging shells, when 6 opponents are shooting at you, you're going to take some hits eventually, and you will lose your valued health pool. On top of that, one other thing to note, and perhaps it's not as visible, is the fact that our guns never really stop firing unless we decide they're to stop firing. We're going to conceal ourselves up and hide. And as we now aim towards the enemy Svetlana, we're going to see the concept of damage saturation versus fire damage come in handy here. Whereby we can see the Svetlana is already blackening up somewhat in a couple of sections, and whilst they've still got pretty much just over half their health, over time this health is going to dwindle off through successive fire, especially in the aft section when they start to pull back, as we duke away from some more shells. And our Nikolai is still providing the wonderful bullet sponge in order to provide some scouting for us. And now as we land shells on the aft of the Svetlana, notice how our damage drops off, and we're just hoping for fires at this point to get the rest of the job done. Because we're struggling to provide the lead to get shells to land amidship or towards the bow of the Svetlana. Whilst that's going on, we should clarify that, to be fair, the Yubari is a brilliant example of a ship to be used at longer ranges. What of its 73 metres of dispersion at its maximum range? That's a rarity at its tier, and it's something that's unique about this ship. But as we drop the shells in here, we set a fire, and one of our shells breaks on the Svetlana, but nothing else. We can see as we land more and more shells towards the rear of the Svetlana, we're doing less and less damage, only 396 there, so that's the damage saturation coming into effect. But in the top right corner of our screen, we'll see that our damage is going up because of the fire we set. So that's how we're offsetting damage saturation, and we're continuously ticking up more damage. In the meantime now, we're pressing back into the centre of the map because our team's losing a lot of ships and we really need to start having a bit more of an impact. And that's one problem that you can find by keeping your distance, is that if your team crumbles early, just because of circumstances, then you become more involved more early on. Meanwhile, if your team's effective at soaking up the damage and staying in the match for a longer period of time, then you don't have to worry as much about getting involved in the midst of the enemy ships. And here, as we can see, our shells are missing a little bit, the Svetlana is still burning, and what with our fire being there and continuously raging, that should be enough to put them out of the game. But now we need to focus on something else, in particular a combination of a St. Louis and a South Carolina, as we pick up the kill on the enemy Svetlana. whereby we take a number of hits, some high explosive shells, by the looks of things from the enemy St. Louis in particular, perhaps one or two from the South Carolina. And lobbing our high explosive shells, we prioritise the South Carolina because as soon as they're out of the game we don't have to worry about murderous armour piercing shells coming in for our broadside. And with 2 kills to our name, we now focus on the St. Louis. And they've put their fire out, so let's go cause another one, because if we can do that, as we chunk off a nice amount of their health pool there, then they can just burn to death, because they haven't got too much health left. In the meantime, notice how we're pulling the distance once again, because whilst the St. Louis does have good range, as soon as we get to these longer distances, the slow travel times of the shells, typical for the lower tiers perhaps, means that they're not going to be too effective, and we score the fire there, and we can just let them burn to death now if we so desire. But as we've got nothing else really pressing us, we decide to throw some more shells in as well, just creeping back towards the St. Louis, managing the distance, and they're out the game for our 3rd kill. And now things are evening up quite nicely. We can see that it's 3 versus 4, 3 on our team. Now there's the worry of the enemy battleship, the enemy Kaiser, which Nick informs me at this point over the TeamSpeak, it's at 3/4 health, which is a major concern because we need to get that ship's health down as quickly as possible. So how are we going to do that? Keep a distance, harass the thing to pieces, set fires and run. Simple as that. We'll keep applying the concepts we've been doing so far. Meanwhile, the enemy destroyers, if they get close enough, we may bring in the torpedoes, but because of our concealment and our speed, we're made to hunt those destroyers, and we can do so very effectively. And notice we've still got over half our health pool, which means we can afford to take some hits from the low caliber guns of the enemy destroyers, but not their torpedoes, they'll shred us to pieces. And here our Caledon spots the enemy wicks, we open fire, getting in some good shots, supporting our teammate, knocking off 2,500 there, and we can see how we can afford to be closer here, especially seeing as our Caledon's providing a brilliant screen. And having landed in 2 successive salvos, we throw in our 3rd, and unfortunately our Caledon falls to the torpedoes of the enemy wicks by the looks of things. And we focus very briefly on the V170 because that's a hard thing to detect, and we want to get some damage off on it. We land 2 shells on it before reprioritising the enemy wicks as they disappear thanks to their concealment. Now we still score 2 hits there, taking our damage up to 60,000 so far, and our St. Louis finishes off the wicks. Now at this point we begin to pull back to our friendly St. Louis because the St. Louis, whilst a cruiser, can be seen in a way as a little bit of a mini battleship. It's got a lot of health, it's not too fast, and it's got a ton of guns, and it's got a good amount of armour as well. So again, we're going to let them tank up the damage. In the meantime, we'll provide the continuous damage output support, but we're not going to abandon them. And what with the V170 having gone south-west, down towards the western side of our capture point, we decide perhaps we need to spot them. But it's the enemy Wakataki instead, who's in our capture point. And we're going to gradually bring them down now, using our guns to good effect and keeping our distance from the Wakataki, what with their 7km torpedo range, as we pick up our Confederate and cause a fire on the Wakataki, which they put out. We land a couple more hits. Not really getting too many full damage salvos at this point, i.e. all 4 shells landed on the target. We whiff those shots, aiming another set. Hopefully we'll get some good damage out here. We land a fire on them. We can cause them to bleed to death now through the fire, but we'd like to take them out of our shells. It'd always be nice. Completely whiffing that, and the St. Louis finishes them off. At this point we can see the torpedoes coming in as well. Looking over towards the enemy Kaiser, who's now spotted. We aim in and start to try to whittle down their health in collaboration with our St. Louis. And it's important here to note we are working with our teammate. The idea being that the St. Louis can quite easily do what we're doing, perhaps not as manoeuvrable, perhaps not as fast, but they can gradually bleed down the health of the Kaiser through their sheer number of guns. And as we keep chucking them in, we're hoping to get 1 or 2 fires as some torpedoes are spotted again. Most likely from the V170, and they didn't quite make it. That was very fortunate. And as always, as I've always said in a number of videos, luck always has its part to play, and there we were lucky. No skill involved there, just lucky those torpedoes ran out of range when they did. But coming back to the Kaiser at hand, we know that the V170, if those were V170 torps, which we're assuming they must have been, must be somewhere off towards our western side, which is why we're making our way that way now to try and cut them off. And they throw any more torpedoes towards us, we'd assume that our bow's going to be towards those torpedoes and will increase our chances of dodging them by a significant margin. And that's our logic there, that's my thought process, that we should be pointing our bow towards the ship that can actually, in a way, pose a threat, as this Kaiser seems to be locked up in trying to bring down our St. Louis. But the two are tossing high explosive back and forth towards one another, and we're targeted at this point very briefly by someone. We're thinking it would have been the V170 as we caused 2 fires on the Kaiser thanks to our successful high explosive salvo, and their health is just dripping off at this point. Pardon me, as our friendly St. Louis picks up a 3rd fire, and we get our high caliber at 79,000 damage. So we can see that whilst at first we didn't do too much damage as the Kaiser throws a load of high explosive towards us, probably panicking for shell choice at this point. Whilst we weren't doing too much damage at first, our damage has rocketed over the course of the game with 5 minutes left as the St. Louis finishes off the Kaiser through their fire and went out to 85,000 damage. So that's just a case of hunting a lonesome destroyer. And the way we're thinking about it is, if they were towards our west, let's go towards the enemy cap, let's go north, because they'll either play defensively or they'll play offensively. Offensive ambushing or defensive ambushing, either one we will bump into them eventually. Their prize of course will be to go for our St. Louis, who's never really going to see them or be able to chase them down. And having noticed 1 torpedo being launched here, we can think straight away, right, this V170 has got to be north of us. So I'm telling our St. Louis at this point on the mini-map, look, it's probably heading towards our cap or north of our cap. And as we make our way around, we're adjusting our speed, slowing ourselves down and then speeding up just in case they threw some preemptive torps around the corner. And we're keeping close to the landmass and turning in, so that way we can bring our bow towards those torpedoes and perhaps soak up one as a result if we have to take one. And very shortly, the V170 gives their position away by going into our caps. They've got to be in the northwestern corner of the cap. There's no other location they could be in. And as we come around the corner, we're going to see them. We'll get the spot off on them. There we go, detected. And we'll finish them off now for the final kill of the game, with our St. Louis also helping out. We're loading the 2nd salvo here. Game over, time to take a look at the post-game stats. A tough match that our team gradually turned around. We can see that our battle performance consisted of 87,477 HP of damage, whereby we scored 162 hits with our main batteries, 7 incapacitations, 4 enemy ships destroyed and 12 fires set. And we also picked up 3 achievements. The first being the Arsonist on the enemy Svetlana, whereby we whittled down over 40% of her health pool through fires alone and destroyed her through fire. We also picked up 2 heroic achievements. Firstly, the Confederate, for damaging at least 6 enemy ships, the damage caused to each ship exceeding 20% of her normal health pool, and the High Caliber, for damaging at least 4 enemy ships, whereby the damage caused must exceed 30% of the total health pool of all the ships in the enemy team. Looking at the team scores, we can see that we came first on our team with 1,511 base experience earned. Now we did not carry our team, and a special mention should be made to our friendly St. Louis, whereby they did a brilliant job, especially towards the end, of tanking the damage from the enemy Kaiser, whereas we would not have been able to. And they did well to pick up 4 kills like ourselves. Our role was a continuous damage output over the course of the game, whereby we played an overall low impact to the team effort, but the impact was felt over time, with our damage output gradually rising. Looking at our detailed report, we have one key item to note here, and that is the fact we damaged 9 enemy ships, 4 of which we went on to destroy. The importance of this is in showing how we did not become bogged down in bringing down one foe at a time, and that's something, especially as a newer player, you can have trouble doing. Sometimes you'll become obsessed with bringing down that one enemy ship that's got 10% of its health left, versus all the other enemy ships that have got over 75% of their health left. Of course, taking down an enemy ship and getting it out of the game means there's less guns firing, but with our kiting playstyle, sometimes we will need to pull out of range of those ships that are wounded and instead focus on those who are charged forward and are trying to get stuck into the fight. So we need to have that flexibility to change targets and be aware of what's available for shooting versus what's becoming a diminishing target of opportunity. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away with 217,247 silver credits and 2,948 commander experience. To conclude, hopefully today we have demonstrated how the concept of kiting in a cruiser in general can be very valuable once understood and practiced, whereby in our Yubari, we demonstrated how holding our opponents at longer ranges and raining down consistent fire meant that we were a constant damage dealer throughout the course of a rather long match, and in return when our opponents opened fire on us, we could just frustrate their aim through the combination of priority target, i.e. the captain's skill, and our maneuverability. Whereby surely in the end the enemy players must have been thinking, there's this one guy in the enemy team I can't quite hit and do enough damage to, but he's ripping me apart over time as a result. And if anything, we can be considered like a kite in the wind, ever present and very difficult to bring down once it's built up enough momentum. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.